For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. Did anyone see what happened yesterday in the NCAA Women's Tournament? For those who didn't see this game right here, it was a first-round battle between the number 3 seeded Wolfpack out of NC State and the number 14 seeded Mocs out of Chattanooga. The game itself was fairly uneventful on the court. NC State won 64-45, as the chalkiest tournament of all time stayed incredibly chalky, with NC State never really being in any danger of losing the contest, seeing as Chattanooga scored just 26 points over the first 30 minutes of the game. However, years from now, this game will be remembered because of the bizarre officiating. Because as it turns out, one of the officials working this game was a woman by the name of Tommy Paris, and even though she started the game, she was removed at halftime, because as it turned out, she had a massive conflict of interest. Chattanooga was playing in this game, and Paris received a master's degree from, of all places, Chattanooga. Somehow, Paris never disclosed this, and somehow, the NCAA never conducted any sort of background check. The NCAA only realized halfway through the game, oh crap, a Chattanooga alum refereeing a Chattanooga game may be a problem. Because of this, she was replaced by a standby ref. In a statement put out by the NCAA, they said there was a switch of game officials at halftime of the Chattanooga-NC State first-round game because it was learned after the game had started that umpire Tommy Paris had a conflict that, if known, would prevent her from working that assigned game. It raises the obvious question of why they didn't know that before, because it's not like it takes a rocket scientist to go on someone's LinkedIn and see where they went to school. Still, this situation was unbelievably bizarre to say the least. And the NCAA is, in many things, extremely incompetent, so I can't imagine this happening in any other sport. I mean, could you imagine the NFL assigning a referee to a game where said referee has a massive conflict of interest that was super easy to identify, and the NFL had no idea about it until the day of the game? Well, as absurd as that sounds, I bring that up because in 2012, that's exactly what happened during a battle between the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers, when the NFL assigned a Saints fan to officiate the game. As for the end result, well, let's just say it was an awful look for the NFL on so many levels. Because this is the story behind one of the craziest officiating controversies in the over century-long history of the National Football League. And before I start this story about the game between these two teams behind me right here, this is a story that I've been sitting on for a long time. I vividly remember when exactly this happened. It was week 2 of the 2012 season, and I remember where I was. I was at the Jaguars-Texans game down in Jacksonville. The Jaguars got obliterated that day. They had like 120 yards of offense against the Texans. It was brutal. But I remember being in the stadium hours before the game and watching ESPN on one of the TV screens in the stadium, and I saw this story pop up, and I was just in disbelief that something like this could actually happen. I figured there was no better time than now to talk about it, since this is actually kind of relevant in light of what happened in the NC State-Chattanooga game yesterday. So let's take a deep dive for the next few minutes and take a trip down memory lane, shall we? And with that, before I talk about the controversy in question and what the NFL did about it, we need some context to understand just who this person was, the importance of the game at hand that he was about to officiate, and why this person was even officiating in the first place. It's September 16th, 2012. It's week 2 of the NFL season, and we've got a battle on our hands in the NFC South down at Bank of America Stadium between the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers. This was a pretty important game for both of these teams, even though it was only week 2. I don't just mean because it was a divisional game. Both of these teams entered with an 0-1 record, with New Orleans getting upset at the hands of Washington in RG3's iconic debut, and one of the best debuts by any rookie quarterback of all time, and with Carolina losing by 6 on the road against Tampa Bay. The winner of this game picks up their first win of the season, while the loser falls to 0-2 after 2 weeks, which is not good. Consider this. From 2009 to 2011, there were 36 teams to make the playoffs, or 12 in each season. All 36 of them had at least one win after the first 2 weeks of the season. So if you start 0-2, history is not on your side in the slightest bit. Is your season over? Not by any means, but you will definitely have some work to do. As for how this one turned out, as you'll be able to tell from the highlights of this battle, the Carolina Panthers prevailed on their home field and won their first game of the season, taking it over the Saints on an overcast day in Charlotte by a final score of 35-27. This was one of those games that was won by the Panthers because of how dominant they were on the ground, as there was nothing that the Saints could do to stop Carolina's rushing attack, with Cam Newton, D'Angelo Williams, and Jonathan Stewart all having more than 50 yards rushing. When you've got 3 players individually doing that, you're doing something right. Carolina finished the game with 219 rushing yards on a whopping 5.3 yards per carry. And keep in mind that this number would be higher if it wasn't for the end of the fourth quarter, where the Panthers were either kneeling or trying to run out the clock, and everyone knew it. The Saints had a porous defense that season, especially against the run, as they ranked dead last in the league in rushing yards and yards per carry allowed. And based on this performance, it's not hard to see why that was the case, as this was a pretty bad omen for how bad their run defense would be all season. However, besides that, the notable thing about this game was that this game was taking place during one of the most tumultuous periods for the NFL in the 21st century. Because to start off the 2012 season, we had the infamous referee lockout. I'm not going to dive too much into the intricacies of the lockout, just because that's not the purpose of this video, and there are plenty of stories and deep dives on that out there already. However, what you need to know about the referee lockout was that this meant that all of the regular referees, as part of the NFL Referees Association, could not work, because the NFL and the NFLRA couldn't come to an agreement on their collective bargaining agreement. Now, the NFL had used replacement refs before. They used them to start the 2001 season before an agreement was reached shortly after the season started, partly because of the terrorist attacks on September 11th. And now, a decade later, they were using them again, hoping that this would blow over. Obviously, it did not. The replacement referees were absolutely terrible, and besides the obvious, like the Fail Mary and the Patriots-Ravens game that led to the manure chant from the crowd, I distinctly remember one preseason game between the Jaguars and the Giants, where the referees forgot to implement a 10-second runoff, even though that was mandated by the rules, and my personal favorite, where the referees called the block in the back on the punt returner. Not the punt team, the freaking punt return man. I don't even know how that's possible. I don't know how a returner can simultaneously commit a block in the back while he's running with the ball, but that's beside the point. Anyways, this Saints-Panthers game was being played with replacement officials, and this meant that the NFL had to find over 100 officials and conduct background checks and do all of that. They were playing the start of the season with people who had never refereed an NFL game before, had no prior history with the league, and would likely never ref another game after the lockout was done. Which takes us to the man in question, because the side judge for this game that you've been watching this whole time was supposed to be a man by the name of Brian Stropolo. This was a man who did not have a lot of experience whatsoever officiating games. He only had 3 years of experience calling games, and that was at the Division III level, so obviously, he never thought he'd be in the NFL at this point. Stropolo was now officiating games in 2012 in the NFL, despite the fact that he had only started officiating games in 2009. Still, it seemed like Stropolo, despite the lack of experience, knew what he was doing. He worked the opening game of the season, the nationally televised Wednesday night opener between the Dallas Cowboys and the defending champion New York Giants. And everything went swimmingly, to the point where if you didn't know any better, you would have had no idea that this was a replacement crew. Stropolo's crew was not just great in that game, but they were great all preseason, as they were rated the highest crew in the league according to their grading system. Said Stropolo months afterwards, when we came off the field after that opener, Executive Vice President for Football Operations, Ray Anderson, was in the end zone high-fiving us with the biggest smile on his face. We walked in the locker room, and Commissioner Roger Goodell was standing there by himself and shook every one of our hands. He said, "Guys, let me tell you something. That was amazing. Y'all look like the real deal. Y'all set the bar so high. I hope the rest of the crews can come up to do what y'all did." All of the NFL officials were smiling. So Stropolo seemed to be in pretty good standing with the league. He was on the highest rated crew. He called a great preseason and a near flawless week 1 game in front of a national television audience, and he seemed like he might even have a future in this league, even after the lockout was done. And with that, he got his assignment for week 2. He was going to head down to Carolina to work an NFC South game between the New Orleans Saints and the Carolina Panthers, as in the game that you've been watching this whole time. No issues with that whatsoever, right? Well, there was one slight problem. There was one teeny tiny problem with this that, I don't know, might seem like a pretty big oversight and a pretty big deal, but it might just be nitpicking and making a mountain out of a molehill. Oh yeah, that's right. Brian Stropolo was a Saints fan. Stropolo was a legitimately big fan of the New Orleans Saints, and he was now set to work a Saints game, and no one in the league office recognized it at the time. Stropolo, like just about every American back in 2012, had a Facebook account, and with one simple Google search to access his account, or one quick look at his profile, you saw multiple instances of him in Saints gear. Here's a photo of him standing in front of a boat, wearing a Saints hat and a Saints jacket. I think you could reasonably assume that he was a Saints fan off of that photo. But if that wasn't enough, here is another photo of him wearing a Saints hat. Alright, maybe this doesn't mean anything. Maybe he just likes the logo and the word mark and thinks it looks cool, and he likes to wear cool stuff. Heck, I met a girl one time who was wearing a Jaguar shirt, but she didn't even know who the Jaguars were. She just said she found it at Goodwill and it looked cool. So, maybe he's not really a Saints fan. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. That is, until you get to the photo where he's outside the Superdome in a black polo, surrounded by a bunch of Saints fans. That photo, by the way, was from August 25th, as in, not even 1 month before this game. He was tailgating with Saints fans, wearing Saints colors, before their preseason game. When Stropolo got hired by the NFL as a replacement ref, he forgot to scrub all the photos, of which there were several, of him wearing Saints gear and rooting for the Saints. And if there was any doubt whatsoever that Stropolo was a Saints fan, because I don't think there can be after those photos, but still, if there was any doubt, Stropolo made a Facebook post after the Giants-Cowboys game that he worked. He said on his timeline, "Thanks to everyone for all the support. The crew did a great job tonight. Next stop, September 16th at Carolina versus the Saints." The comment section? Well, that was full of Stropolo's mutual friends hoping he would rig the game in favor of the Saints. One friend wrote, "Hey now, be nice with those yellow flags for our Saints." Another friend wrote, "That's awesome that you get to be an official for a Saints game. I didn't think they would let you since you're from Louisiana." And yes, he was from Louisiana and played football at Nicholls State, about 50 miles outside of New Orleans. He was basically a Louisiana lifer, which by itself doesn't necessarily mean you're a fan of the Saints, especially because his formative years growing up were spent with the Saints being largely god-awful. But when you combine all the evidence, when you combine the many photos and the Facebook posts and all of that, the fact that he was outside the Superdome on August 25th and worked the game on August 23rd, yeah, that was a major conflict of interest. Now, what's even more bizarre about this was the fact that the higher-ups in the NFL had no idea about this. But this was extremely common knowledge if you just did even the slightest bit of research. It's not like you had to dig up and find newspaper articles from the 1970s or anything along those lines. One simple Google search showed Stropolo in Saints gear. Case in point, John Harbaugh knew about this. That's right, Baltimore Ravens head coach John Harbaugh knew that Stropolo was a Saints fan. During week 3 of the preseason, when the Ravens played the Jaguars, Harbaugh spoke with Stropolo before the game and told him that he saw photos of Stropolo in Saints gear by conducting a Google search. When Harbaugh said, "You're a Saints fan," Stropolo responded by saying, "I'm from New Orleans, but I'm neutral. I'm from the NFL." Harbaugh laughed and said, "Oh no, I'm just messing with you." So somehow, even though you could find out in 5 seconds that Stropolo was a Saints fan, the NFL never bothered to do that. Or they were just that technologically incompetent and couldn't find it out. They didn't know how to work the Facebook. When you think about what John Harbaugh said and just how easy it was to find this information, it almost feels like the controversy from 1999 involving the Eminem song My Name Is and the commercial that the NFL ran promoting that song, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. That was one of my favorite videos to ever make. The long story short with that one is that in 1999, the NFL heard My Name Is, they heard the chorus of it, thought it was a cute little song, and they decided to have that song play in a commercial of theirs about a bunch of guys named Joe, like Joe Namath, Joe Montana, Joe Theismann. You get the idea. No one bothered to listen to the full song, and just as it started airing, the NFL pulled it immediately after, saying we had no idea about the song's lyrics, we had no idea about the content of the song whatsoever, even though you just had to listen past the chorus. It wasn't hard. The very first line after the first chorus is "Hi kids, do you like violence?" And that's not even one of the most top 10 shocking lines in that song. No one did their due diligence whatsoever. No one bothered to listen to the full song. It's almost like this situation with the Saints-Panthers game. No one bothered to do a simple Google search of the man. You would have found this easily, almost like the Eminem lyrics. It's crazy. It's almost like if I wanted to be an official in the NFL, and the NFL had no idea that I was a Jaguars fan. That's how obvious this was. And on the day of the game, as you might be able to imagine, the NFL got a tip that one of their officials was a Saints fan, and he was set to work the Saints game. Somehow, the NFL didn't realize this, despite it not even being a secret or requiring a lot of digging, until someone let them know. And once the NFL realized, oh crap, we have a massive problem here, they swapped out officials, with Stropolo being yanked from the game just hours before he was set to take the field. Said Ray Anderson on the move, "We took the safe and appropriate measures. The league erred on the side of caution, and while they said that what Stropolo did wasn't improper by any means, they just wanted to play it safe." Stropolo did not work that week, and he never worked another game in the NFL. He was sidelined for week 3 while the league was investigating the matter, and by the time week 3 ended, following the Hail Mary debacle, the regular referees were back out there, as the NFL and the NFLRA finally came to an agreement. Brian Stropolo is one of the most fascinating stories of the referee lockout from 2012, and it makes sense to talk about him today in light of what happened at the NC State Chattanooga women's basketball game yesterday, if you're watching as of this video getting released. So if you want to be an official someday in the NFL, a couple of tips. Number 1, do not cheer for any team. You have to be like Rob Lowe. You just have to root for the Shield. Any allegiance for a team whatsoever, and you're screwed. Number 2, if you are going to cheer for a team, don't post it on social media, or at the very least, if you do post it, make sure to scrub it the moment you get the job so no one knows about it. And you probably shouldn't be going to games as a fan. The Saints were involved in their fair share of controversies in 2012, from Sean Payton being suspended for the year, to other players and coaches being suspended for a bit, to this referee incident. But on this day in 2012, this side judge got sidelined. Oh, and before I do my traditional sign-off, you might be thinking to yourself that this was a pretty cool story, but this was just a moment in time. Something like this would never happen again, right? There is no possible way that the NFL allowed an official to referee games in 2023 and might allow them to do so in 2024, even though there was tons of evidence suggesting that they were a fan of a specific team. There was no possible way the NFL just forgot to conduct a background check, or if they did, they conducted the laziest one possible. They repeated the same mistake that happened in 2012 and compromised the integrity of the game in the process by allowing a fan of a specific team to referee games, including one of that team. There's no way, right? Right? I'll see you guys Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.